Welcome to Around the Fire, a space for conversations to nurture hearts and build lives following Jesus. I just did a point. I don't know why I did that. Thinking more deeply about big ideas and how to apply them.
You're very welcome. That was Sarah. It's clearly very nervous, Sarah. I'm Jonny. We are friends and leaders at Elim Life Church in Birmingham in the UK. And why are we here? We love having conversations, building community, and the joy of working that out with real people in real time. We are practitioners. We are shaped and formed by many years of pastoral ministry. We are not claiming expertise in anything, possibly even of our own being.
Our own ability to communicate.
Much pointing and shouting today. But we are making space to just try different practices that help us in our obedience to Jesus and the community that we're a part of.
Yeah, brilliant. And just a few changes as we head into season 3. If you are listening to us, hiya, you can also now find us on YouTube, which is very exciting. And if you found us on YouTube, hello, I just waved for the purposes of those who are just listening. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcast. And we would love you to be sharing and engaging and connecting with our kind of big conversations. So you can do that. You can send us your questions and your feedback to podcast@elimlifechurch.co.uk. So drop us an email as we're exploring walking well.
Great. That would be fun.
Yeah.
What is walking well, Sarah? Why do we keep saying that?
So walking well is the big theme that we're exploring. If you haven't listened to our first episode on walking well, you can go back and listen to that. We are thinking about what it means to walk well with God, this idea of walking well with Jesus and with others. And some of those sort of like directional decisions that we make in life, choosing the narrow way of Jesus. And to help us do that, we have 4, what would you call them? Themes?
Sure.
Titles?
Yeah.
Ideas that we are looking at. Last episode, we looked at what it is to walk well because we're made to walk in the garden as friends of God. This episode, we're going to be thinking about what it means to walk well because we are made to walk humbly, doing what is right and loving mercy. Next episode, we're going to think about we're made to walk as children of light. And then in our final episode of the start of season 3, we're going to think about we're made to walk worthy of the calling we've received.
We are. That is the intention.
Lovely.
That is the intention.
Let's go.
Some of the practical application of a decision to say yes to Jesus and how we help each other with that. And we talked in the last episode about the consequence of deciding for ourselves what is right and good is that we are in a place where our relationships with each other, our connection with our Creator, and our need for rescue is sort of under examination. So then what does that look like in real life? That is part of what walking well looks like. And so as our figurative feet get moving. We just want to say again, this is not like whether you can climb a mountain or,
That's
a different podcast.
Anything. Yeah.
This is an absolute diatribe. I was introduced over the Christmas break to, there's a YouTube channel called Outdoor Boys, and it's a man and his sons, and they go out and get lost in Alaska, and he builds igloos and does something. We're not that. We can't do that.
No.
We can't do that.
It's like people.
It's great to watch. It's amazing to watch, but you're not going to get those skills here. That's not what we're talking about. We are talking figuratively in your spiritual existence. What does it look like to be inclined towards the person of Jesus, to honor God, and to be filled with the Spirit of God, to live a life that is honoring to God? That's sort of what we're equipped to talk to you about.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to try and do. And so there is a way that you can walk, and the way that you walk matters.
Yeah.
And there is a trope. If you have been around a faith community, if you've been a part of a church, if you are involved in anything that uses the Bible to shape its decisions, you will have heard these verses before, but perhaps not read much around them, or maybe spent as much time with where they belong. So we are thinking about Micah today.
Yeah, so Micah...
Hence your nervousness.
Hence my nervousness, because, so it's just helpful for people to know, we, as communicators, we're doing our own version of a boot camp as we're going to be exploring Micah. So these 4 episodes are kind of big highlight ideas, headline ideas, and then we're going to unpack them through the year. And Micah is one of those books, I don't know if you... Maybe not, because you're you, but for the rest of us, Micah might not have been somewhere we've spent a lot of time. We might know Micah, we might have heard of Micah, we might even be able to say, that's a book in the Bible. You might know that it's a prophetic book. You might even know that it's a minor prophet. We'll maybe explore what that is. And you might be really, really familiar with these famous verses from chapter 6. But then apart from that, like,
maybe not so
maybe not so much. And so what does it mean then? Because it's this really famous sentence that we are made to walk humbly, doing what is right and loving mercy.
Yeah. So the full kind of quote, if you like, it's Micah chapter 6, verse 8. And a version of that says, "Know, O people, the Lord has told you what's good, and this is what he requires of you, to do what is right, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." And you might have that, I'm not being flippant, you might have that on a fridge magnet, you might
Genuinely, I've had it on like a sticker, and I've stuck it on, to remind me, that is
an
part
invitation.
of the invitation to walk with God and to walk well with Jesus, requires and looks like that.
Yeah. So, we have lifted that clearly for this year. We think that's important. And so we're not cross at that statement, but we feel it would be helpful to understand where that statement comes from, who first heard it, why, what's happening.
We don't want to be, like, one of the things we encourage people is to understand, like, the context that it's written in, who it's written to, who it's written for originally, like what that means. And so although we are kind of trying to focus in on maybe specific verse or verses, we want to set a bit of the context of that, because otherwise it can then just become only a bumper sticker or an inspirational quote. And that's actually, there's so much more to what God is saying through this. So talk to us about the context of Micah, and then like talk to us about like what a minor prophet is. 'Cause I think both of those things will help as we
he wasn't short. Like that wasn't it. We might have been, but like that's not.
He didn't go around in the key of E minor. He was
pensive
like
and
a sad prophet. I mean, he might have been. Who knows?
It's just the scale of the book. Like it just is not as long as some other books.
Yeah.
Like
so you would have major people like Isaiah, Jeremiah.
So Isaiah's a good one because they share some time periods, but the writing's just not. There's not as much of it. So don't overthink it. Fewer words. Fine, minor.
Dealt with that one next.
That's where we're going today because we need gas to talk about other things. But there's not some secret cheat code. Like it's not being get from you. Those who organised how we understand these things helpfully kind of helped us understand. Like that's what's happening there.
Yeah.
Different conversation for a different day. But Micah, it's not a very big book. 7 chapters as we receive it. Depending on, there's a couple of different ways that you can chop it up, but generally I go with 3 based on what I've read and studied. Some will do 4, so fine, but I kind of loosely group those 7 chapters into kind of 3 sections. For a modern, it's perhaps not as easy and breezy as we would like. It's perhaps not.
There's a lot of like evocative language in there. It feels quite, when you read it, it feels quite harsh, I think.
It is harsh.
On purpose. It feels quite confronting and provoking, which I know it's meant to be, but you don't let that put you off from reading it, is what we're saying.
You don't read it. So understand it from, we really want people to engage with this idea of the story of God. We talk a lot about what's our created best to tell the story of God. And we're not inferring or implying that it's fiction by saying that, but there are devices used to help us understand the nature and the character of God, our relationship with each other, and our need for rescue through things that we seem to be made to respond well to. And one of the things as humans that we respond well to is story.
Yeah, absolutely.
We know that to be true because we all love the cinema. We all love
a soap opera.
You might have an Audible subscription. You're interacting with story all the time.
Even things on socials and online is about a glimpse into a story, isn't it?
If you are
literally,
if you're a sports ball person, your team is telling you a story, you will know the story of your sports team, the highs, the lows, the bits in between. So we are
the epic adventures.
Yeah, we're wired to respond to story. So we're not saying the story of God is fiction. What we're saying is there's a way that we can communicate God that we go, I'm coming with you. I understand that's tracking. So if we think about some of the bigger pieces of the story of God, as humanity decides to choose for itself what's good, the consequence of that is death. Our relationships with each other have been severed. Our connection with the Creator is lost, and we are placed in a position of needing rescue. Keep that as kind of 3 of the building blocks of the story.
That's the bigger picture of the story that all the stories of the Bible find themselves in, really, isn't it?
So when we get to Micah, the leaders of the community have not done a good job.
No.
They have decided for themselves what's good.
Yeah.
And we are now dealing with the consequence. So relationship...
And God would seem that what they've chosen isn't good.
Less good.
Yeah.
Very bad. Very, very bad. So where we are in those bigger pieces of the story, we are 100% in consequence territory here.
Yeah.
We are 100%, our relationship with humanity's relationship with each other is severed. The connection with God has been lost despite multiple warnings. And so now we are in a position of needing rescue. And so loosely, those three sections of Micah, there is judgment being declared on areas, on places, the first couple of chapters. And then chapters 3 to 5, there is some harsh words and correction being brought to the leaders of the people. The book of Micah is really important for the days that we live in. Leadership matters.
Yeah.
And there is consequence for bad leadership. And the book of Micah lets us know what God thinks about corrupt, broken...
Yeah, it lets us know what bad leadership is.
Yep.
Like, as you read through Micah and the things that you see Micah speaking out against, it's really clear, like, okay, this is not good leadership.
Yeah.
This is not the way to do it. It's not, like, exploiting people is not okay.
Yep.
Like, taking advantage of the marginalized is not okay.
Nope.
Making yourself richer while everybody else gets poorer is not okay.
Yep.
And so I think God makes that really clear, which I think is actually quite helpful to
Yep.
go, oh, okay.
Yep.
Yeah, good leadership can look like this and not so good leadership looks like this.
And then we get from kind of sort of chapter 6 into chapter 7, we get some of the rescue pieces of the puzzle. We get the promise of deliverance.
Yeah, there's hope in there, isn't there? Yeah.
So right at the end, after it's been really heavy, course correction, judgment spoken appropriately to those who have turned their back on what was known to be the way of God. So the people of God have turned away from the ways of God, and God's like, no, we're not doing this. That's not how I'm going to be known in my creation. And so the judgment comes to course correct that, and then at the end of Micah, we begin to see these glimmers of hope, the promise of change, the promise of deliverance, the promise of compassion, and the glimpse of the faithfulness of God.
Okay.
So it's not all, just the misery and failure and brokenness of people.
It's not like, here's what you've done, now sort yourselves out.
No, we get this glimpse of the character and the nature of God in rescue and redemption, deliverance and forgiveness.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what's happening. It's written to the people of God during the reigns of 3 kings. So if you're a history kind of person, you can kind of plot some of that. Around 735, 700 BC, give or take. Who am I to add clarity to that statement? And what's happening in time and place is like, the culture is fading fast. The prosperity that they've known, the shine has come off it. And idol worship is increasing, which might sound obscure to us. I don't think it's obscure to us. We all have a version of that. I think we see enough of that in contemporary culture to go, I know what that is. Whether that is literally worshipping created images or whether that is a thing that isn't the God of the Bible.
That you're finding a sense of life purpose, that is taking your time, attention, energy, all the things.
Anything. It could be yourself, could be your career, could be your hobbies, could be an image made to look like someone, something, somewhere else. It could be mental escapism, could be habit-forming behavior, could be escapism, could be all of that fun stuff. So we're familiar with the idea.
Yeah. And it's that... that God has like set up this agreement, this way of being, this way of connecting and being in relationship and friendship. And the people of God have chosen to step away from that agreement, have not kind of honored their end of that agreement, that words you might find are like covenant or promise. Like God said, look, if you follow me, if you love me. And part of the story that we've been thinking about is that God had set up in Genesis, like this is why you follow who I am. I'm light in darkness. I'm life. I'm hope. I'm joy. You can have a relationship with me. Like, why would you trust anyone or anything else? So in those days, like gods with a little g, they literally, every village and town and person would have like, you could choose. It was a plethora of them. And so I think God has set himself in a really good way to go, no, I'm the one that's worth following. Like, I'm the one that's worth walking well with. I'm the one that has created you and will rescue you. I'm the one that moves towards you. I'm the one that has made you in my image. And I want to be in kind of relationship and friendship with you, and I want you to walk well with me and with others. And then we get to Micah, and this is another example of this that we see through the history of what it means to be human, is that people don't always choose that.
And one of the ways in which that story is told, which depends who's watching and what they want to do with it. One of the ways that is prophesied to the people at this point is like, oh no, another nation's going to come and take you over.
Yeah.
You're going to be invaded and occupied, and you're going to lose your sovereign right to be a nation. You're going to belong to somebody else, and it's going to get really weird, and it's going to get really hard, and it's not going to feel like home anymore. One of the consequences of not doing that is you are going to suffer under the tyranny and the rule of another empire. And so in this instance, in Micah, he's like, hey, Babylon's coming. They're going to come and get you. And they did. And so,
like we look at this with the hindsight, but people were receiving these words, these messages, this, I guess, it's almost like, hey, here's the situation. Like, and I find it uncomfortable, but I like that it's very real. It's like, this is the situation, like this is what you've done. And that can be really confronting to come face to face with parts of yourself that you're not like a big fan of. But then that encouragement in the middle, which is where we kind of want to take this idea of like, but there's a way to be that's different to that. Like there's a way to be that is walking well with Jesus. That means these temptations to choose for self, to decide what is good for yourself, to continue to separate yourself away from the life of God or the love of God. There's a way to choose differently that impacts your soul, but also impacts your community and your village, your city, your nation. So I think all of those things are happening here as well, right?
Yep. And what is exciting to me is and partly why I think it has the potential to be helpful for our community to think about this through Micah. There can be, I feel, the potential for misunderstanding of like the grace of God is kind of a new concept. And so we kind of know old covenant, grumpy God, like something's got to die, got to give, got to like would just sort of grin and bear the fury until we can kind of get to the end of it. And from like 3,000 years ago to us, the character and the nature of God is like, I don't want any of that stuff.
From Genesis, and now we're picking it up in Micah. Like you see some of that big story that God set up, and it was even around like where you lived and like where you were able to be. So this picture of like exiled or separated, disconnected from God, and then reconnected and walking well with him, just kind of plays itself out, doesn't it? And we get to Micah, and it's a particularly, for God to speak through a human being in this way with this kind of message, we've got to have got to a place that's pretty dark and desperate. Yeah,
really grim. We are far from the garden, figuratively at this point. And so I think for me, it's helpful for us in our contemporary culture to see like, oh, God has always been God. And so when people like you and I, who have the privilege of communicating in community about the character and the nature of God and the weight that we feel of doing that well and encouraging people in that, and to be like, no, this is who God has always been. God has always been just and merciful and good, and like that has always been who God is, and that will always be who God is. And really just good. Our interaction with that can sometimes be misunderstood as like, but like we have to say that nowadays because who would listen to a God who's grumpy all the time? No, that's not what's happening. Like, and
also justice. He is a God of justice. And that's something we're going to think about a little bit today in this episode. But it's not that he is unaware it's not like he's trying to smooth everything over. I think we do sometimes live in a world where let's not have any kind of conflict, let's smooth everything over, let's just kind of like move past that thing and keep everybody all taken over. God's like, no, there are some things that are not right here, there are some things that are not good, and I want to do something about that, but you can also be a part of doing something about that. You can join me, you can participate in doing something about that, which is then a reflection of the nature of God, the character of God. I just think that is incredible, that like we get to be part of God making things right, God bringing justice, God revealing mercy. It's not only to us, but we get to join in with what God's doing with everyone else, right?
Full stop.
Amazing. So good.
Let's have a think about Micah. So we're in chapter 6, and there is this moment that happens. There's a bit of a gear shift if you've been kind of reading Micah to this point, and you get to chapter 6, and you might have a chapter heading in your text that gives you a little clue, or you might not. Either is fine. But it's presented to us as God laying out his case to the people of like, hey, actually, here's my complaint with you.
Yeah.
So we're not speculating, we're not guessing,
Again,
we're not unsure.
This is what I've noticed is going on, and I want you to know that I know. And, and then once we've acknowledged it, we can move.
You got a choice.
Yeah.
you get to decide. So God lays out God's case. So kind of chapter 6, verse 3, my people, what have I done to you? How have I burdened you? Answer me. I brought you up and out of Egypt. So he's retelling them the story. So remember those big pieces. And redeemed you from the land of slavery. I sent Moses to lead you, and Aaron and Miriam. My people, remember what Balak, king of Moab, plotted, and what Balaam, son of Beor, answered. Remember, so that's a whole thing. That's a whole story.
It's essentially like every time you decide to go your own way, I am trying to find ways to invite you back in.
And so this reference specifically is like a king who wants to curse the people of God. God raises up somebody who's not even a part of the people of God and blesses the people of God. So God's like, even when people not on our team are trying to see you out, I've still got you back.
I've got you.
I've still got you. Like, what else do you want from me? So he's reminding them of that piece of the story. He's reminding them of where they've been and what's happened. Remember your journey, and depending on your translation, it's either Sunday morning appropriate or it's not, from either Acacia Grove or somewhere else to Gilgal, that you may know the righteous act of the Lord. And then the tone changes, and Micah on behalf starts saying, well, what shall I come before the Lord? This is the oh no moment. This is the we were wrong. Like, we need to deal with this.
And also not not trying to bargain with God, not trying to be like, oh yeah, but there was extenuating circumstances and the thing. This is like a real look in the mirror and going, oh God, you've described us rightly. Like, you've summarized us rightly. You've described how we've been living rightly, and so now we can choose how to respond to that, right?
So I framed this as, so what does it cost to turn and walk towards what's good? So if we're aware that we've been going our own way, we've been aware that, oh no, like I have, again, I'm saying this for the 1,000th time because I think it's helpful for us, humanity has turned its back on what's good and has walked its own way. This is the point between the end of verse 5 and the start of verse 6 where that realization has happened. And so there is this unspoken awareness of, oh, what's it going to cost us to turn around and walk towards what's good? So then Micah does this thing. What shall I come before the Lord with? What shall I bow down and exalt God with? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with 1,000 rams, with 10,000 rivers of olive oil? Should I offer my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? We want to set this up to talk about this as we hurtle towards the break. So,
if you are a regular listener, we're kind of doing something a little bit different this season, giving you a little bit of a brain break. So we'll be getting there in a little while. So
I want to set us up as we get to the break of. So remember, we've come from places have been found wanting, and so generally, and we know some of these tools from later on in the Bible. So we know some of these tools. I would argue Dr. Luke of the Gospel of Luke Acts does this really well. He uses places to describe people.
So when you read those places, you're imagining kind of people groups or types of people.
Demographics, groups. So groups and places have been made aware, like, nope, it's not going to end well for you if you carry on like that. And then leaders have been put under the microscope. We didn't need a microscope. It was blaringly obvious that this is wrong.
Everyone could have known,
And so that has been happening to this point. It's wrong. God has laid God's case out before the people and be like, hey, you've forgotten your story. What haven't I done that you seem to think you're going to be capable of outside of this? So my language now, where do you think you're going to find life outside of the garden? Where are you going to find joy in my presence outside of these? I'm tying these ideas in. This is my opinion now. But that's what's happening in this point. And then this is Micah's response. Remember, it's not about him as a person. He's operating as the prophet or one of the prophets. So he's a messenger, he's a mouthpiece. He's teaching and telling people. You use language. I know we borrow in from other people's ideas of like the plumb line, what the heart of God is. He's representative of that voice we talk about is the acid to the fat, of like it's cutting through, of like this is the revelation of the divine to the creation. He's the voice in that moment, and then brings people through like this escalation of expense.
Explain what you mean by that. I like that.
Pick. I'm going to age myself now. I might have used this example with something else before. As I'm about to commit to saying this, I feel like I've said this before.
That's okay.
So let me use a different one instead. I'll use a different one instead. In your mind's eye, you've got your favorite trolley at your favorite supermarket, and you are about to go and do a version of the weekly shop.
Nice. I can picture myself. I'm there. Right.
And so pick an everyday item, and then we all know and understand how supermarket shelves work. So the things that would be preferred from the supermarket for you to purchase are going to be placed at eye level. So they're usually the more expensive kind of things. And then either side of that scale.
Yeah, if you've got to like ask, as a shorter person, if you've got to ask a taller person, if you've got to borrow their tallness to get it, that's not going to, you're not going to make the effort. So they want the stuff that you really want you to buy in the middle. Yeah.
So imagine you are walking up and down these aisles, and Micah is using a similar idea to be like, what's it going to cost us to turn towards what's right? And you first pass. So he goes, will the Lord be pleased with an offering of a ram? And so you reach for an everyday loaf of bread, and then you're not getting the response that perhaps you're looking for. So you go with 10,000 rivers of olive oil. So maybe now we're reaching for the artisanal sourdough that like is a little bit, you're like, I'm going to know about this when I get home.
Yeah,
like,
it lasts like 3 seconds, and you like, this is a lot of money for that.
There's no preservatives in here. If we don't eat this today, it's not making the end of the week, right? So now we're reaching for something a little bit artisanal, expensive. Is it thousands of rivers of this? We're now going from the everyday to the expensive to now it's starting to get extreme. So like now we're starting to go, do I commission a baker to make some bread? Is that what I need to do? I just wanted a ham sandwich, but like I'm realizing this is maybe a little bit more significant than I thought.
Go buy the bread maker and put together the dough myself.
Right the way through to, should I open a bakery? Is that what's happening? Now it just becomes like
ridiculous
in the extreme. Yeah. So we go through these expense examples of like, is it everyday? Is it expensive? Is it extravagant? Or is it extreme? And so Micah, as a mouthpiece, as a representative, as the plumb line, as the heart of God, as the nature and the character of God, is responding to the case that's been laid out. Yeah. And like, hey, guys, you need to turn this around. You need to move back towards good. What's it going to cost us to move towards what's good? Because culture there and then, here and now, is used to that being a transactional decision. Yeah. In order for me to get what I want, it's going to cost me something.
Yeah. So what's it going to cost me?
So they're not upset or offended that it's going to cost them something. Yeah. They just wonder how much. Yeah. Like how much is it going to cost me? Like I'm used to like resolving this tension by paying for it. So just name your price, basically. Yeah. Is it going to be an everyday kind of thing and we're cool? Is it going to be an expensive kind of thing, which I'm going to feel the pinch of, but you want me to feel the pinch of it, and I get it, I messed up, I understand it. Is it going to be extravagant? Like, do the neighbors need to know? Or is it going to be extreme? Like, is it going to make the papers? Are people going to be like, bro, like that?
What have you done?
Feels like an overcorrection. What's it going to cost me? And then what happens is God's response in verse 8 that is shocking, is like that it cuts across every expectation for what would be presumed to make people right. It says, he has shown you, O mortal. And I stuck my head in this rabbit hole. It's the same language that's used in Genesis 3. I've shown you humanity. I've shown you Adam. I've shown you what's good. And that's supposed to give us confidence in 2025. Like, oh, this isn't just talking to Micah about these things.
It isn't just Adam and Eve.
It's not just Adam and Eve.
Actually this human condition.
I've shown you humanity. Yeah. I've shown you Adama. I've shown you man. I've shown you humans what is good. And we go, I'm already reaching for my wallet. So just tell me. And then God says, no, this is what it's going to cost you to turn towards what's good. And maybe we'll talk about that stuff after the break.
Yeah, absolutely. That you could give everything, but it's love. Yeah. Love for God, for others. That it isn't about possessions or material things, but actually it's about like God wants your heart. God wants you to walk well with him and to walk well with others. So we will pick that up after the break. So if you need a little stretch of the legs, if you need a little walk around the block, if you need a little moment, we're going to give you, I don't know how long the music
as long as producer Andy decides.
Interlude for. If you're like, no, I want to keep diving in, let's go. I'm into Micah. I'm into walking well, humbly, doing what is right, loving mercy. Let's go. Then you can just kind of fast forward it.
Skip forward a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. Bye.
Come back. So welcome back from the break. We are thinking about what it means to walk well, to walk humbly, doing what is right and loving mercy. And we are in the book of Micah and having a great old conversation about it. So we left before the break thinking about this, what do you call it, escalation of expense? Like, what will it cost me to walk well with God? What will it cost me to return back to choosing good and God? And you were helping us understand some of the language and the ideas that we use there of like this sort of escalating. This is what it costs me as like a transaction. Here's what I want, so I'm going to give you this. And then God responds in verses sort of 7 and 8 with this encouragement. So yeah, do you want to unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah. So the escalation, and I think I warned you before we pressed go on this that I might get stuck here because verse 7 has been heavy on me, and I've spoken with a few people about this because I wonder how much it's still speaking to our moment in time and in place.
Okay.
And the line specifically, and it's not in every translation, so if you're not tracking with that, there's nothing secret or hidden here, but just in the translations that I've been reading around and looking at, but this line at the end of verse 7, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul. And it asks it as a question.
I mean, that is like
what's it going to cost me?
Yeah.
And so we're at extremes because we've escalated the expense. So we're supposed to be picking up this idea of like, if it's not the everyday, if it's not the expensive, it's not the extravagant, then it's got to be the extreme. And so then the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul. And it's speaking in the first pass about child sacrifice, which thankfully God's like, no, never.
Was a practice that other religions, other gods were requiring, and what's required of me, not that. Like, that is not required of you.
So then I've been sat in that idea for a little bit longer and going, what does that look like in 2025? What does it look like for us to be saying in response to God, hey, I don't feel like your kingdom, God, is coming in the fullest form to those who need it most. What would that cost for that to be true? The fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? And so then that looks like at the expense of my household. Do I forego relationships with others to make up for what is clearly lacking here? Is it my over-investment in a certain way of delivering a certain type of community? Will that be sufficient? Will you move then? Will you respond then? And it's been really heavy on me that I think we still are living in this rhythm. We're still living in like, God, what is it that you want? What can I give you? What can I offer to you that will bait you out of heaven?
Blood, sweat, and tears. If I give you my blood, sweat, and tears, if I produce,
will you move then?
If I'm efficient, if I'm,
if we make it more like where we have been, will you move then? If we push it further into an unknown future, will you move then? If it costs me my relationships with other people, will you move then?
If it costs me my health.
If it costs me my health, will you move then? If it costs me my sleep, will you move then? If it costs me my peace, will you move then? If it costs me it's really been present on my mind as I've been prepping for these conversations. I'm like, we would merit some time spent in these verses looking at God's response to that question, because it feels a very contemporary question of like, what will it cost for God to move where I am?
Yeah.
What is it that I can give God to convince him to move here? And what God says is none of those things. You can keep your overwork and your dysfunction and your confusion and your pain. They are not the things that I'm not going to take anything from you in order to be present with you.
Isn't that like incredible.
If we believe it to be true, it is. Yeah. If we can live like we believe that to be true, it is. If we can employ people like we believe that to be true, it is. If we can form community like we believe that to be true, it is. If we can
So there's not this like drivenness and this striving and this fixing and this making it happen. Again, it's coming back to that that picture we were thinking about in Genesis of dependency, right? Of depending on God and his goodness and his love and his life that is found in him. And that's not that we never do anything, because I think sometimes people can misunderstand, like, oh, that means you don't really need to do anything. And it's not that, but it's just that the priorities are set by God, and the way that we live is set by God, and the how that we live is set by God, and it's found in him and through him. And the only way we can live this way, and he goes on to say how you live, is through God. Like, you can't do this apart from God. How can you live humbly? Who wants, like, seriously, like, the natural impulse of humanity is not humility, is it?
No, and this is so counterintuitive to us, in that this opens the door for difference in a way that is confounding to us, in my opinion. You can work hard if you want, or you can not work hard if you want. Kingdom's coming either way.
Yeah.
Figure that out. Like,
right.
You can be bothered if you want, or you can not be bothered if you want. Kingdom's coming either way.
Yeah.
Like, you choose. Which is absolutely baffling to us. To our tradition, we've talked about this a lot in the podcast, so I don't want to go over this too much because we've spent a lot of time here. But the roots and the history and the heritage of our tradition, which we're grateful for, we're not cross at, most of it, we have a fair scoop of puritanical work ethic in there.
I think that's also a Western worldview mindset.
We love working hard.
Like, we love a progression.
Yeah.
So we like events, and we like progression. So we like to be able to, like, measure. So we've been here and we'd like to get to there, and then this is what it's going to cost us. This is kind of what's happening here, isn't it?
This is where I am. This is where I would like to be. And this gap will be defined by an amount of time, and here's how hard I'm going to work to get there.
Yeah.
We love all that.
Yeah, because God has said, you're not where you need to be.
Yep.
And then the human response is, well, how can I make...
What do I need to do?
Yeah, how can I...
What are my KPIs?
How can I make that happen? And God's like, you can't. That's why I'm God and you're not.
Yeah, which is why the tree belongs to God. That's a throwback to
episode one of season 3.
Because the consequence of that belonging to God is life. The consequence of when we try to uproot that and plant that in our allotment is death. We kill the tree. And so if we can wrestle with these ideas, if we can sit with these ideas, and what it kind of was sat heavy with me as I was thinking about these things, it's a niche within a niche within a niche.
Welcome
shocker.
to the podcast.
Who knew? But like within our world, right? Within what we do, I was like, how many of our contemporaries are, how much of the fruit of the body has been crushed as a consequence of misunderstanding this idea? Like, how much juice have we made? How much mess have we made? Trying to figure this out. Whereas if we would carry on in the exchange, God replies and says, I've shown you humanity what's good, and what I require of you is, and so this is what we're going to get into now, to act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. And there are some thoughts from, there is I think this appears in a couple of different places, some thoughts from a man called David Pryor, who talks about justice and mercy are within the nature of God. To live them out, we must walk humbly with God. They, as in all three of these things, belong to each other.
Yeah.
And we can't apply them separately. They don't arrive pre-packaged to us as individual components to unpack and use, but they belong to each other. So by walking humbly with God, we know his nature and we become like him, acting justly and loving mercy. So that they are not, we have to completely abandon that transactional presumption of how we interact with God, of like, okay, so I'll pay for some justice and I'll pay for some mercy, and then I'll apply them to the things that I want to do. It's like, no. What I want you to do is to become those things. As God says, my nature and my character is justice and mercy. I want you to become those things. Yeah. And walk with me as you learn to live those things, rather than doing those things.
Yeah.
This is...
It's not like an add-on. It's like a bolt-on.
And you can't have them as separate things.
Yeah.
You can't have, I'll season this decision with I'll shave a bit off the justice block and then I'll sprinkle in a little bit of mercy. Like, you can't season decision-making with those things. They're not kept in a storehouse for us to access. They are either who we are becoming or we're walking the wrong way, is the inference here. And what God has said is, no, what I have asked for you to do is to become these things. That's how the garden grows. Like, that's where life is seen, when you inhabit these things, when you live these things, when you are these things, not deciding, they're not tools for the allotment, but they are fruit that's grown in the garden. That is the consequence of being in an environment of joy and of presence. You will produce justice and mercy. And so then for us in real time, so as we descend the ladder back into terra firma, so then where am I not that? Where am I not that? And unless some of us are geared for the abstraction of the enormous, and so globally, where is the injustice? And what do I want to do about it? Yes and amen. But then for the rest of us, with our feet planted in a school run, with our feet planted in, doing the big shop, with our feet planted in the reality of the gift of everyday life that we've been given, where am I not justice and mercy? And what would I like to do about it? And then we go, oh, I'm not like God here. I did a thing that I know isn't the fruit. That life hasn't been produced. I've just produced death, which tells me I've walked away. So then we ask the Micah question, what's it going to cost me to, and we go, oh God, I'm sorry, I don't want to.
I can't sign up to another rota. I can't give any more money. I can't, And God's like, no. I want you to take on my nature. Like, I want you to, that's just part of like the becoming who you are, because you can't, like, I can't just manufacture that stuff. And even if I could afford to pay for it and buy it in, that doesn't change who I'm becoming. That just changes an outward expression of that. It doesn't change my heart towards God or towards others. And I think some of what we see through the story of God is that it's not just that I want you to do the right thing, but I want you to know why it's important to do the right thing. I want you to know that you are motivated by love for me and for others, and that the only way that you can do that is by receiving my love for you, and then letting that be an expression of my love through you for others. There's a really good book called Micah for You by a guy called Stephen. Just takes you through it really quite just in a way that's quite understandable. And he talks about this. He's like, it is God's justice that motivates ours. It is remembering who God is that reshapes who we are. If we walk humbly with our God, we will love to be like our God. And I love this picture. So we must open the vaults of our hearts. One of the primary ways we can enact this loving kindness and justice is directly with those around us. And so that's real life, real relationships, real situations and opportunities and decisions where we can say, okay, God, help me to choose you in this. Help me to choose life in this. Help me to, as I walk with you, what is your heart for what I do with my money here? Like, let's take I have this conversation with some friends. Do I buy off a company that I know it doesn't give their workers a living wage? And so I get something fast and cheap and easy, often in fashion. So do I do that because that's good for my budget because I'm in a cost of living crisis? Or do I say, no, I won't have all the things. I'll maybe just choose one thing because I know someone's going to have been paid really well or a living wage in order to produce that thing. Yeah. And I think it comes down to some of those. So yeah, it might be that you feel really called into the big picture of some of that, but it might come down to even just your individual choices in those things. Yeah. Because when you read through the book of Micah, what you see is that the people, the places, the leaders it just becomes so infiltrated that it was okay to exploit people, that it was okay to push people down to make yourself better. And God's like, this is just so the opposite of what it looks like to walk well with me.
For sure.
And to represent me and to reflect me. But that's not something you kind of add on. It's not like a hat you wear and go, okay, I'm wearing my justice hat today or my humility hat today or my mercy hat today. That is the nature of God being formed and shaped in us so that then we can offer that back to others, right?
Beautiful. And I think let's really, if we've come this far, we've committed to the conversation, the the way of our worldview right now, so the Western world, is there is this tension in what will make us great again. I'm using that language on purpose. What will make us great again will be the acquisition of things. And the more of something that I have, the safer we're going to be and the better off I'm going to be.
Or the more power I have, or the more influence I have, or the more position I have, or the more status I have.
I would argue, and I'm not qualified to speak on politics, so that's not what I'm doing, but I am qualified to speak on like pastoral care in relation with communities, because the way that malforms itself and comes out in real people in real ways is there's a nervousness around everything. There's a nervousness around some unknown, unspoken entity is going to take something from me. And what the story of God is, you will never be able to provide for yourself anyway. So throw yourself at the mercy of God, who will always have more than you think you will ever need anyway. So now I live in the city without walls today. Now I live in a place without the fear of somebody coming over and coming in to take away from, but I live from a place of abundance, like where there are streams of living water accessible for all, where those without money will be invited to come and to eat, where those without the ability to sustain themselves will be invited to be safe, where those who perhaps don't look like me, think like me, believe like me, pray like me, smell like me, respond like me, eat like me, are invited to share space with me, dependent on the one who can provide and meet all of those needs anyway. What makes us great again in those environments is to not hoard or protect through the fear that an unknown is going to take power or resource, but to understand I have no ability to protect that stuff enough for myself.
I have no control over that anyway.
Now, that doesn't mean there are not people doing bad things on the face of the earth. Like that's not what I'm saying, which is why I felt it was important, we feel it was important to part of the reason why, to ground this conversation in a minor prophet buried in what perhaps might feel an obscure reference to a lot of people, as a way of expanding this idea of like, this isn't some liberal theology of like, but God is love, so like just be cool.
Chill out, man.
Like chill out, bro, you'll be fine. Like this perhaps then turns out to be central to our understanding of who God is, and where we feel confronted by the nature of God perhaps becomes an invitation by the Spirit to say, where am I not like justice and mercy? Why am I feeling this as a pinch point? Why do I feel threatened that somebody not like me might get ahead? Why am I threatened that somebody who perhaps not like me is being offered safety? Why do I feel threatened that somebody who's not like me perhaps might be given an advantage and an opportunity in life? Or even
someone who's like me. Why is it okay that someone, I'm doing the same thing, I'm doing the same job, and they're getting ahead? Like
why
this
do
idea
I feel
of
threatened
ahead.
by that? Yeah. And so back to this idea of this transactional exchange of this is where I am and I've had the feedback and where I am is not good. So this is where I need to get to. So then I'm going to decide that an amount of time is justifiable to get from where I am to where I want to be. Now, what's it going to cost? Is it going to cost me my early mornings? Is it going to cost me my eating habits? Is it going to cost me my relational investment? Do I need to start another thing? Do I need to go to another thing? Do I need to be more? Do I need to understand this? Do I need to add that? Do I need to change my physical representation in the world? This is a huge thing that, again, pastorally is on my awareness, and so I feel qualified to speak about it. Not from a place of judgment. It's your body. How you look is between you, Jesus, and whoever you share space with. So it's not a sweeping statement about a fashion trend. It's about why do we feel the need to present ourselves to the wider community in certain ways? Why do I need to feel it's necessary to augment my presentation of myself in a way that would be more acceptable to those that I'm in community with? What do I think I'm gaining by appearing more presentable to somebody outside of myself? I think is a really valid question to ask. Where am I like justice and mercy in this? Like where is my fear dictating how I appear to those that I'm in community with? What's my fear in perhaps being presented of an older age in community? What do I feel that I'm going to miss out from? What do I feel I'm being held back from? Where do I feel resources being kept away from me? Or that's not, my community is deciding that's not a good investment because you don't look 21 anymore. Like what about that is producing in me a decision that I'm not embodying justice and mercy.
And it might not feel, I just want to say on that, Jonny, it might not feel like fear. It might just feel like, well, this is just the way of the world. It might not even be a conscious decision. It's just that the juice that we're pickled in means that we see the way that people live and that other people live. And there's something about human nature that wants to kind of either keep up with the Joneses, is a phrase we use.
Safe together, aren't we?
Wants to be like others and yet also recognized as unique and special. We're that's part of human nature. And so it might not even feel like, oh, I'm being led by fear, or I'm not choosing justice, or I'm not choosing mercy. I'm not embodying that. I'm not allowing God's justice and mercy to kind of be found in me or expressed through me. It might just feel like, well, of course I want to do this and I want to do that. It will feel very normative, like that this is just the way of the world, and this is what it looks like to exist in the world that we live in, and this is what it takes to get by in the world, not even to flourish or to thrive, but simply to survive. And so this is part of like Micah's, I guess, invitation and challenge to us, that we go back to this really ancient story that we have to work a little bit harder at to understand, but that element of like the fairness, the justice of God, it's not just a 21st century idea. We see it all the way through, all the way through the story of God. And so then what does that look like? How do we embody that and live that? How do we receive that? I think we recognize it in God. And we recognize this is who God is. And if we're made in his image, and that's part of what it looks like to be that. And then we ask ourselves those questions. When we do spot it in ourselves, or if someone who loves us spots it in us and gently helps us to see that we respond to God in that, knowing there's grace in that. That God is not there like, right, I've caught you now, and you've recognized that you are not loving justice and you're not walking humbly. Some of these ideas of this language is like unqualified love, like unlimited love, like loyal and steadfast love. The reality is, even if we love people deeply, we're never going to be perfect. We're never going to get it like right 24/7. And so when that happens, and when we become aware of the gap, and that separation, either to God or that disconnect between us and the way that we are treating others that we know or that we don't know through, like I said, our purchasing choices, then we get to come to the God who is all of these things to us and ask him, God, would you shape me? Would you help me? Would you forgive me? Would you show me? Would you guide me? Would you help me to take away the things that I don't need to carry, and help me to pick up the things that I do need to hold on to, in what it looks like to walk well with you and others.
Yeah, I think too that it's a really interesting idea, and it has to start because of where we live in the world and how we think, and it starts at an individual place, but then there is this eternal call to community. And we see that in God. We believe in the Trinity, and so we see that in God. We see community role modeled in perfection, and so then there is an invitation to community as we imitate our Creator. And so as it starts as an individual, but then it's really interesting to me how these ideas then influence a community and permeate and shape a community.
Yes, this is to a group of people, isn't it?
Yeah, it's to a group. It's not to an individual. And we have to read it as an individual, the habits that we have of our day and age, which is fine. But that's where we start. But then how do we move that over to our communal existence? How do we move that into our shared existence? What do we decide is acceptable for a community to walk in justice and mercy, not as an affectation or as a thing that we do gesturally to be approved of in the wider community, but that's easy to see and to smell and to hear and to know of each other as something happens when we belong to the body of Christ, that is separate to our denominational preferences. That's not the point I'm making, but when we say yes to Jesus, we belong to each other, we belong to the body, we function as the body. And so way away from a Sunday morning, we are representative of each other in how we move. Even when we're not together, we're together, right? That's part of what we believe. And so it's really interesting how these ideas of this transactional exchange can be moved into a relational dependency on God, by Jesus, empowered by the Spirit. What does that look like? And there's a cultural moment happening right now where class is really easy to distinguish, and it's really easy to see those who have and those who do not have. And it's really easy to move the needle in culture quickly and with minimal effort by being angry with landlords and billionaires. Great, fine. I have nothing to say about that. And however, what does it look like to be a group of people who walk in a way that looks to inhabit, to embody, to personify justice and mercy for those who are on the edges of the world, those who are through perhaps their own consequence and decision making, and we go, well, you've already got enough. You've got more money than 100 lifetimes could ever cover. What does that look like? As a body turns towards what's good, to say, even in spite of you having more than, it would change the face of the earth if you made 3 very different purchasing decisions, or you treated hundreds of thousands of people just marginally differently. What would that look like? If the body of Christ turned with justice and mercy towards those who right now it's easy to score cheap points on and make decisions. Now, I don't have quick and easy answers to those things. And that doesn't mean we negate our duty to the poor and to literally and figuratively the orphan and the widow. Doesn't mean we stop extending justice and mercy at that end of the scale. But I think it's perhaps a little bit easier and more obvious to cover that end of the scale, where the invitation here, this is why it's shocking. This is why it was shocking to Micah. This is why it was shocking to people 3,000 years ago. This is why it's shocking to people today, to be like, no, this is what's required of you. And we go, but they're gross. And God's like, figure it out.
Because that's the way he was to the people who were gross at the time.
And so,
who were, you know.
It's this two-way mirror, right? This two-way mirror of like, if we want to have that conversation, let's have a little conversation about how you have been exploiting people, about you have been treating those who are not like you, about how you feel when those who don't respond in the way that you do to those traffic lights, to those purchasing decisions, to forgetting what day bin day is, to like, let's have a little conversation about that, shall we? And we go, what would it cost me to be right with you? Well, they know this is what it would look like.
And part of the story that we've already talked about through Micah is that we can trust that that's who God is, because he was like, and remember the exile, and remember the Exodus, and remember, you know, the donkey, and remember this, and remember, because this is who I am consistently to you. And so if I am consistently this to you, and you are made in my image, then it is possible for you also to grow more consistently like this too.
And we're going to live like this forever.
Yeah, that's wild, isn't it?
So do you want to figure it out now?
Let's start now.
That's the invitation. Like and another thing that is, in my opinion, unique about what we believe, like this is not hope deferred when all the chips come in. This is like, no, you can live like forever's real now.
Well, you see that towards the end of Micah, there's this element of hope, which is a future hope that we live in the light of now. We live in the light of Jesus. We live in the light of God coming to humanity in that way to like restore that disconnect and bring us back into right relationship with him and with others. And so now we get to walk with Jesus and with others in this way. Now, that's not to say we'll always get it right. And that's not to say that every kind of human impulse will be good and humble and loving mercy. But that as we are becoming like Jesus, these things become, I don't know how to say it. These things become more like we want to be like these things rather than feeling like it's an imposition. Like we look at it and we go, oh yeah, the heart of God for that is this. And we open the vault of our hearts. We say, okay, God, we want our hearts, that place from where we make our decisions and all those things to be more and more like yours than not. Yeah. And that's, again, part of that invitation, I think. So I think we're going to, unless you've got anything else you particularly want to bring out on that before we pray. Is there anything
We're at time. Yeah, I think we need to stop.
So let me, just lead us in a very simple prayer of response. We're just going to ask a question around these verses, and you might want to, if it's helpful, to just take a deep breath and to like sit somewhere comfortable and relax. If you're not like on the go and driving somewhere,
don't do
please,
that
do that. But yeah, just to ask in light of the justice and the mercy and the loving kindness of God, Holy Spirit, what are you inviting me into? What does it look like to embody justice and mercy in the way that I think of myself, in my relationship to others, in my relationship to you? Where am I not yet embodying, living out, accepting and reflecting the reality of your justice and mercy. And God, would you show me what it looks like to walk well in this way for your glory. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for being here. We are doing our best with this stuff, so get in touch, let us know. Producer Andy is doing a great job. We make his life very hard.
Yes, very difficult.
So thank you, Producer Andy and the team. Get in touch, podcast@elimlifechurch.co.uk. Subscribe to this YouTube channel, because this is where all the podcast stuff's going to live. Keep your eyes open for all the other things that we want to add to that, from your feedback and from the things that will be helpful to you. We have 2 more. We're going to talk about what it looks like to walk as children of light and what it means to live in the calling that we've received.
Yeah.
I have thoughts. So
Shocker.
Yeah, right. So we will see you really, really soon. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll speak to you in the next one. Bye.